Welcome to Politics Done Right. I am your host, Egberto Willies. This is a progressive program that will take the mystery out of politics. This is the program that will encourage you to make sure government becomes we the people. Whether you are liberal, progressive, conservative, or otherwise, you get to air your point of view. We are an independent media outlet that, unlike mainstream media beholden to corporations, we only owe allegiance to you. Remember, you can also send me a tweet at EGBERTOWILLIES. That is at Egberto Willies. Let us engage. It is Politics Done Right. Welcome to Politics Done Right from the studios of KPFT 90.1 FM, Houston, your community radio station. We have a great program for you today. Democratic State Senator Mallory McMorrow shows how to decimate the right. It's not time for Democrats to throw in the towel for election 2022. Economics professor Dr. Richard Wolff discusses the inflation fraud and the death of capitalism. You know what? Let's get busy. When I talk about Democrats being premature in thinking that they're going to have these big losses, right? I mean, the things that are going to come out, we know that the Republican Party has been pretty much, what's the word? Derelict in their duties, but more than derelict in their duties. They've been simply doing things that are illegal and wrong. And while their pew, the people who follow them, seem to always not forgive them, just don't give a damn whether or not they do what they're supposed to do, there is a vast number of Americans who do care. But every day, some new thing comes out. What we have coming out today, Kevin McCarthy lying about wanting Trump to resign. I wonder how Trump is going to take this. Let's go ahead and listen to this, and then we'll go ahead and take it on the other side.
So, AB, if you're a Republican at the highest levels who's been critical of Donald Trump, how are you sleeping tonight?
Well, it's incredible reporting, and it's incredible that Jonathan is telling us that there's so much more, not only in the book, but recorded. And this is one thing to play the Republican narrative that the media is, wrong and biased and make things up. It's another thing to then be busted with a tape hours later. So this is not only a warning to Republicans all over town at the highest levels, but it's also an indication that the January 6th committee has known about this information all along and the conversations that were had all along. And that's important for people who are going to be coming in front of the committee, like Don Trump Jr., to know that there could be recordings of these phone calls. And it's an amazing, breathtaking failure on the part of Kevin McCarthy, simply because he has tried to ascend to the speakership for so long, and he's made mistakes along the way that have proven that he is just simply too stupid to have this job. The idea that he put out an emphatic denial just hours ago to be upped like this with tapes just hours later is truly just an epic embarrassment to the Republicans and to the man who's been trying to be speaker for all these years now.
Now, I want to make one sort of a correction. She says he's too stupid to be Speaker of the House. He's too stupid to have that job. But then again, Donald Trump was our president. Donald Trump was presumably the leader of the world. So we can't quite say that. We know it's a fact, but that doesn't preclude him from the possibility of being the speaker. But if we do our job, progressives do their jobs, Democrats do their jobs, they can ensure that this big turnover that everybody is waiting for doesn't have to come to fruition. If you work hard, you just may mitigate what some still see as inevitable. I don't. Democratic State Senator Mallory McMorrow, she destroyed the evils being done by the GOP by attempting to call people pedophiles, by attempting to call, by maligning many Democrats and progressives for what they're doing, the good things that they did. And she hit at the heart of what these people are all about. I want you to listen to her, and then let's take it on the other side.
I didn't expect to wake up yesterday to the news that the senator from the 22nd district had overnight accused me by name of grooming and sexualizing children in an email fundraising for herself. So I sat on it for a while wondering why me. And then I realized, because I am the biggest threat to your hollow, hateful scheme. Because you can't claim that you are targeting marginalized kids in the name of, quote, parental rights if another parent is standing up to say no. So then what? Then you dehumanize and marginalize me. You say that I'm one of them. You say she's a groomer. She supports pedophilia. She wants children to believe that they were responsible for slavery and to feel bad about themselves because they're white. Well, here's a little bit of background about who I really am. Growing up, my family was very active in our church. I sang in the choir. My mom taught CCD. One day, our priest called a meeting with my mom and told her that she was not living up to the church's expectations and that she was disappointing. My mom asked why. Among other reasons, she was told it was because she was divorced and because the priest didn't see her at Mass every Sunday. So where was my mom on Sundays? She was at the soup kitchen with me. My mom taught me at a very young age that Christianity and faith was about being part of a community, about recognizing our privilege and blessings and doing what we can to be of service to others, especially people who are marginalized, targeted, and who had less, often unfairly. I learned that service was far more important than performative nonsense like being seen in the same pew every Sunday or writing Christian in your Twitter bio and using that as a shield to target and marginalize already marginalized people. I also stand on the shoulders of people like Father Ted Hesburgh, the longtime president of the University of Notre Dame, who was active in the civil rights movement, who recognized his power and privilege as a white man, a faith leader, and the head of an influential and well-respected institution, and who saw black people in this country being targeted and discriminated against and beaten, and reached out to lock arms with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when he was alive, when it was unpopular and risky, and marching alongside them to say, we've got you, to offer protection and service and allyship to try to right the wrongs and fix injustice in the world. So who am I? I am a straight, white, Christian, married, suburban mom who knows that the very notion that learning about slavery or redlining or systemic racism somehow means that children are being taught to feel bad or hate themselves because they are white is absolute nonsense. No child alive today is responsible for slavery. No one in this room is responsible for slavery. But each and every single one of us bears responsibility for writing the next chapter of history. Each and every single one of us decides what happens next and how we respond to history and the world around us. We are not responsible for the past. We also cannot change the past. We can't pretend that it didn't happen or deny people their very right to exist. I am a straight, white, Christian, married, suburban mom. I want my daughter to know that she is loved, supported, and seen for whoever she becomes. I want her to be curious, empathetic, and kind. People who are different are not the reason that our roads are in bad shape after decades of disinvestment, or that healthcare costs are too high, or that teachers are leaving the profession. I want every child in this state to feel seen, heard, and supported, not marginalized and targeted because they are not straight, white, and Christian. We cannot let hateful people tell you otherwise, to scapegoat and deflect from the fact that they are not doing anything to fix the real issues that impact people's lives. And I know that hate will only win if people like me stand by and let it happen. So I want to be very clear right now. Call me whatever you want. I hope you brought in a few dollars. I hope it made you sleep good last night. I know who I am. I know what faith and service means and what it calls for in this moment. We will not let hate win.
Senator McMorrow, that is putting spine into the game. That is how Democrats, that is how progressives should be acting. That is how they should be promoting their message. They have the message of truth. They have the message of passion. They have the message of empathy. They have the message of really being what America needs, what America wants. They're the ones who are doing something for people. They're not the ones play acting. They're not the ones doing evil. Stand up on your pedestal. Stand up at your podium and promote what you've done and what you intend to do, and not allow charlatans to go out there and sing lies, sing a song as if they have accomplished or will accomplish something. Senator Mallory McMorrow, thank you. Democrats should win 2022. Democrats will win 2022 if they follow some of the rules that many of us in the progressive space have been putting out. I want you to, the argument currently against Democrats is inflation is high. They cannot control inflation. So therefore, throw them out and bring in the anti-democratic group into power. Somehow they're going to do a better job. Of course, we know that's a fallacy, but let's go ahead and listen to this question that Chuck Todd asked one of Bernie Sanders' past or one of Bernie Sanders' subjugates or advocates. And I want you to listen to his reply because it's important. And then we'll take it on the other side. This is something for us all to emulate.
Does the senator accept, though, the idea that the checks that you said were enormously popular actually contributed to our current inflationary problems?
This, again, it hurts my soul around this fight, because if you're a Biden administration and other Democrats, this is an opportunity to lean in. What happened with the stimulus checks? We gave money into people's pockets, child tax credit, unemployment insurance benefits, and stimulus checks. What happened when we gave that money out? Corporations came around and stole it. That's what happened. They took it back out of your paycheck. Why? Because they wanted to report not profits, Chuck, record profits. S&P 500, you look at their profits off the charts. That was a choice by corporations. So yeah, I could raise that bag of potato chips by 25 cents. I could increase the cost of this car by $1,000. But everyone thinks there's supply chain snarls out there.
So what you're saying, the inflation issue should be on the corporate. 100%.
Lead that fight to say, hey, yeah, maybe there should have been some price increases. But what happened was price gouging, price collusion, corporate power in America trying to reach into your pocket, say, oh, I see you got some money there coming back to me. And if you just look at the record profits of these corporations, that is the fight. That is the fight. People are asking, who the hell is going to take them on? It is the government's responsibility to take that fight on.
I think you have made clear you'd like to see the Democrats have some fight in them. I mean, you've used that word a lot, and I say that
muscularity.
It does seem like that is among the biggest problems.
Right, executive order. I mean, everyone's going to appreciate that. Sometimes these fights are hard, you're going to lose.
Right.
But you got to lean in, whether it's executive orders, putting legislative votes on the floor again, go around the country, wield that authority.
Now, you have to ask the question whether it is that Democrats can't fight or it is that they also know that they are in the pockets, or rather they are in the pockets of the plutocrats, the executives, the corporatocracy. Let's be clear here. You hear how he said it distinctly. Why do we have inflation? Because the corporations are stealing your money. They know that you got some more money in the stimulus. They know that you're getting more wages, and they're going to take it back away. We've discussed this many times on Politics Done Right. We've also had Dr. Economist Professor Richard Wolff come and tell you pricing power belongs to the corporations. They decide how much to charge. And like I mentioned before, if you don't have shortages of products, which we don't have, if you have people that are buying the same amount of product, which they are, and then the only difference you have is price increases, which is inflation, and also that is reflected into the bottom line of the corporations with record profits, that means that corporations made the choice to create inflation. Again, right now, many Democrats are sitting back and licking their wounds as if they should be held responsible for the inflation rate because of the stimulus package, etc. You notice a question that Chuck Todd asked. That is what they want you to believe. Is Bernie Sanders ready to take responsibility that even though a lot of people like the stimulus, given the stimulus overheated the economy? Given the stimulus did not overheat the economy. Are you saying that people should live in a permanent state of poverty, in a permanent state of want, in a permanent state of need? If you believe that given a stimulus overheated the economy, you are saying that you are privy to an economy that cannot support people living at a certain rate of happiness, of a certain rate of having the appropriate finances. Because if you think giving people what they deserve, and not even what they deserve, less than what they deserve, but what they hadn't had. If you think for 1 minute that just letting people just exist is what your economy stands for, and if for some reason people get a little bit more, it goes into inflation, it doesn't work that way. The billionaires continue to amass their billions during the pandemic. The billionaires continued to pilfer Americans, and they're doing right now. Democrats should be leaning in and pointing out that it's corporate thievery. It's a capitalist thievery that is occurring right now. And until we change the messaging paradigm, until we change it in its entirety and stop allowing the mainstream media, Chuck Todd saying, well, is Bernie ready to accept responsibility for overheating the economy by promoting the stimulus, which everybody likes? Hell no. Bernie's not sorry. Bernie wants more stimulus. We need to take away a lot more money from the billionaires, which they got on your backs. That is what we need to do. When are we going to see the big picture? When are we going to understand the concept that every capitalist knows? What is the price of a product? Whatever the market can bear. In other words, whatever we can steal from you. That is the price of the product. Listen to what we talked about a few days ago with Dr. Richard Wolff. That is what it's all about. Chuck Todd, I'm glad you asked that question, because it should give the impetus to every Democrat to go ahead, every progressive to answer that question. And anyone who doesn't answer that question the way you just heard it answered is in the pockets of the corporatocracy. Welcome to one more edition of Politics Done Right. I'm Egberto Willis, your host. Today, we are honored once again to be in the presence of Dr. Richard D. Wolff. He's a professor of economics, Emeritus, University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and a visiting professor in the graduate program in international affairs of the New School University in New York City. He is a founder of Democracy at Work and host of their nationally syndicated show, Economic Update. His latest book is The Sickness is the System. Don't we know it? When capitalism fails to save us from pandemics or itself, and is available along with his other books, Understanding Socialism and Understanding Marxism, at www.democracyatwork.info. Dr. Wolff, it's my pleasure to have you on Politics Done Right once again.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very glad to be here.
Let me start real simple, sir. I want to tell our audience, first of all, that I became aware of you after you did a symposium called Capitalism Hits the Fan. And this former pure capitalist was forever transformed after seeing that piece, and it changed my life entirely into one who believed in humanity at that point. So my question to you, sir, first of all, is what is wrong with our economy right now?
Well, a little bit depends on what you call our economy. If you mean the United States, the capitalist system here, let me talk a little bit about what's wrong with that. But I need a preface. Every economic system in the history of the world shows the following pattern. It's born out of another different system. It changes and grows over time. And then it eventually passes away and gives way to another system that is born and then goes through the same stages. That's true of old ancient village economies, of tribal economies, of slave economic systems, of feudalism. It's true of them all. And what that means is that the system we're living under now, capitalism, is about going to show us pretty much the same pattern. There's no reason to assume it would be otherwise. And we know capitalism was born. We kind of date that to the 17th, 18th century in Britain and Europe. We know it has evolved over the last 3 or 4 centuries to become the global system it is today. But I'm afraid the inference is the next stage is it's over. And it really isn't a question of whether, it's only a question of when. And I think if with that background, let me take a couple of minutes and tell you where I think the United States was and is. First of all, let's all remember that the Europeans originally came here and destroyed the existing population. Not 100%, but almost, okay? And they came here and they fought with the native population. They fought with one another. And when the dust cleared, we were a colony of Great Britain. And we became a colony and we stayed a colony for a century or more. Now, in the late 18th century, there developed an economy here that was, to make a long story short, sick and tired of being told what to do and how to do it and when to do it by some king thousands of miles away in Britain. So we had a revolutionary war and we became independent. At that time, we were a small secondary part of the big dominant capitalist empire of the world, the British Empire. Mm-hmm. But now let's be honest. Over the last century and a half, roughly from the time of our revolution, our, by the way, bloody, violent separation from the British King George III, a reversal took place. The new capitalism of the United States grew and displaced the old capitalism of Britain. The British Empire doesn't exist anymore. It was replaced by the American Empire. There were others who challenged the British Empire, the Germans, for example, the Japanese, but there were 2 world wars in which these capitalist empires fought each other, and they destroyed each other with one exception. Britain's empire was destroyed, the German empire was destroyed, the Japanese empire was destroyed. We were the ones left standing here in the US. So after 1945, with the destruction of everybody else, we emerged as the American capitalist economy. And look, over the last century, it's been a nice ride for us in America. Not for all of us, obviously.
I was about to say that, yeah.
Yeah, not for all of us, but for the majority, and particularly for the white majority, it was a nice uphill ride. But look, if you remember the history I started out with, everybody had to have known that, like every other system and like every other empire, you're born, you evolve, and then you get displaced. So let me say where we are now. And I'm not saying anything that most Americans, if they don't know it, they kind of smell it.
They can infer it, yeah.
Yeah. We're done. We are on the down. And the down is not very much fun, way less fun than on the ride up, you know? And we have a new empire. It's called China, and they are replacing us. They, in large parts, they already have. The war in Ukraine is a footnote to a shift from the dominance of an American capitalism emerging out of Europe, and it's shifting over to a new dynamic core of capitalism that is in places like China and India and Brazil and South Africa and those parts of the world that were colonial, that were suppressed for a long time. But like the old colony of the United States, they are no longer willing to have their situations dictated by another part of the world that really looks down its nose at them. And, you know, this is very hard. If you look at British history, there are still sizable parts of Britain that still haven't come to terms with the fact that the British Empire is a vague memory. We should learn from that because, as the saying goes, if you don't learn from history, you will be condemned to repeat it.
Yeah, that is sad. Now, I understand that. Now, aren't we doing certain things right now that's exacerbating that death or making that death less pleasurable than it should be?
Yes, because that, unfortunately, is also typical. People who don't understand the situation become increasingly desperate, trying to hold on to what history will not let them keep. That's very classic. You can see it in the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, the British Empire. They keep trying to hold on. That's half the reason they have a queen. I mean, they try to hold on to the symbols. You know, it's downright funny if you take a step back. Well, here we have here in the United States. Let me give you just examples so people see it. One of the dominating powers of the British Empire in the 19th and early 20th century was the fact that the British currency, the British pound sterling, was the global money. It was as good as gold. Okay? The symbol of the United States over the last century has been the role of the dollar, which was that. In other words, the dollar pushed the London stock markets and the British pound to a secondary role, and it became the dollar. Well, over the last 20 years, as China has emerged the new economic colossus, the American currency has begun to be less and less the dominant story, and therefore wealthy people, central banks around the country are kind of reducing their holding of dollars as the reserve behind their currency and are beginning to use more and more yuan, the Chinese currency. Okay, so that was underway. Now you get the Ukraine war. And what does a desperate Biden government do? It seizes the property of foreign central banks, above all Russia. It threatens others. It seizes the private property of wealthy people in Russia. You know, the world's wealthy parked their money in the United States. It was like a subsidy of the whole world. Wealthy people took their savings and put them in a bank in New York and invested them in dollars. You know what they're doing now? They're looking at this country and they're saying, uh-oh, it's on the downswing. We're not keeping our money there. We're not investing. Did we own 5 apartments on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan like a piggy bank? Yeah. Well, we're going to sell 3 of them right now, and we're going to buy apartments someplace else. Here's the joke that's making the rounds in Moscow. Those oligarchs, those super rich people in that country. And by the way, one of the signs of desperation is that the people in Russia we call oligarchs, here we call job-creating investors. The same damn thing.
Exactly.
It's just, you're just playing verbal games. Anyway, the joke in Moscow goes like this. The oligarchs used to take all their money and keep it in the West, in the United States above all else. But now they can't. They're afraid it'll be snatched. So they're bringing it all home and investing here in Russia, which is very good for us. In other words, the United States, in its desperate effort to stop this historic shift, is actually accelerating it. The turn away from the dollar is much worse today than it was 2 months ago before the invasion of the Ukraine. I mean, people have to understand, however tragic the experience is for people in Ukraine. I mean, it's always tragic to be on the receiving end of war, but this is a footnote. What's going on there? It's horrible for them, but in the history of the human race, this is a small moment of conflict between a shrinking, desperate empire on the one hand and an emerging empire which has the luxury of looking at itself and saying, time is on our side. But of course, if the United States were to become more desperate, if things get really worse, how tragic might they be? What might they do? Could it set off a nuclear war? I don't see how any human being can say that they know that won't happen. I mean, the last century we had the 2 world wars. They were the worst wars we've ever seen, and they didn't have nuclear weapons then.
And Professor, what's interesting is that the only country on this planet that we know has used nuclear weapons against other humans, it's us, isn't it?
That's right. Those 2 bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You know, absolutely. And the world knows it. And the world, more and more, I read European newspapers every day. It's part of my job. And I can tell you that even in Europe, allied as it is with the United States, you have more and more people beginning to say what you will hear all over Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Leaders there, whether you like them or not, honest ones, corrupt ones, they're all debating. Maybe it's time for us to change horses because it doesn't look like the one we're on is going to win. It looks like that other one that's coming up fast is going to be the winner. Well, the United States has to face this reality, but what I see is a government and mainstream media that are putting their hands in front of their eyes, not willing to see any of it.
Well, Doctor, let me just say this, Dr. Wolff, because it is amazing that you said that these are some things that I've been thinking about, right? The rest of the world saw that we were willing to elect a Donald Trump and all that he represents as the president. They also saw that in the election of Biden, who is a step above, better than Donald Trump, but at the same time, that Donald Trump got more votes in his second election by quite a few millions that he did in the first. And they have to sit back and think, will the United States put a crazy person back in the White House again? And what does that mean economically for the rest of the world? Isn't that right?
Absolutely. And if you put that together with all of what's going on now, I'm not asking for people to be sympathetic with super rich people, but the American economy has depended on the world's super rich looking at the US dollar and the US economy as where they can put their money, where it will be safe, where private property is an absolute value.
Sacrilege.
All of that has been destroyed. First by Mr. Trump, as you rightly put it. Let's remember, Mr. Trump declared economic and trade war against China. He punished the Chinese companies. He hit them with tariffs. He arranged for the arrest of the daughter of a Chinese tycoon in Canada. And he did everything you can imagine. He promised that he would win the trade war. He did not. He promised that what he was doing would change China's basic politics. It's all a failure. And yet it was the biggest package of sanctions the world had ever seen. Mr. Biden has gone him several steps better, done even more against Russia, not against China. But frankly, because of the alliance between Russia and China, which India basically has now joined, the ability of the United States to call the shots is looking to the whole world like a bit of a bluff. And if you bluff and you get caught, it's never the same game when you do. It's a terrible chance you're taking, which is why you get the bizarre hysteria. But yes, you're right. They've seen not only that Mr. Trump was elected, but that the establishment, the rich corporations that run the country, they didn't prevent it. They let him be the president for 4 years. And so the rest of the world has to wonder, exactly as you put it, what kind of, if the Democrats lose this November or 2 years from now, what are they going to see? And they have to make their plans now to protect themselves from what might happen.
You know what is interesting?
Yeah.
Dr. Wolff, Germany apparently saw that they're spending up the gazoo right now in self-protection and other places. You mentioned something that I think bears mentioning. You said earlier, and I think it is so important, that you read every morning, you read newspapers from around the world. And it would be great if not only more Americans did that, but if our mainstream media actually brought that to the fold as well. I mean, if you take a look at the active discussions between certain neoliberal professors in the United States on Indian TV, you would see a discussion that Americans would actually blow their minds. I mean, I heard an American professor go to India, and he started to chastise India for not simply jumping onto the bandwagon with Ukraine. Right. And when India was done explaining all the destruction that we ourselves have caused, when the Indians were done talking about the financial policies of the United States and how it affected other countries without most Americans knowing these things, the professor had nothing to say. Because the reality is, we only know what we're told here in the United States and not what our brand of capitalism has done throughout the world. Is that right?
Absolutely. Let me give you another example that makes your point. I don't mean to repeat it, but I think it'll help people understand it. Last Sunday was a national election in France, an important ally. I want to point out 3 facts, and I won't embarrass anyone watching or listening to this program by asking them whether they were aware of the following facts. Mm-hmm. Okay. The sitting president, who's been the president of that country for several years, Emmanuel Macron by name, 72% of the French people who went to the polls and voted against him. Mm-hmm. In other words, the French people, more than 2/3, think he stinks as the leader, and they don't want him. That should have been a remarkable headline because of what it implies about what is the second most important economy in Europe, namely the French. Almost not a word of recognition. Mm-hmm. Number 2, the election was presented as if the 2 frontrunners, a right-of-center president, Macron, and an even further right-wing anti-immigrant a woman named Marine Le Pen, that's it. That's who the French are all excited. In other words, France is way over on the right. Okay, let me give you the information. Marine Le Pen got 23.1% of the vote. Okay, let's be real clear. That's less than 1 out of 4 people in France voted for the extreme right wing. Number 2, there was a third candidate. By the way, the French had a dozen people running because the French, if you don't mind my saying so, believe in freedom of choice. You should have a lot of choice when you go to the polls. We in America seem to be very happy with having basically 2 to choose among, and we all know how hard it is to keep them separate, one from the other. Okay, right. So let's go back to France. There was a third candidate. His name is Mélenchon, Jean-Luc Mélenchon. My family's French, so I follow these things. Who's Mélenchon? He is a left-wing socialist. He is to the left politically of Bernie Sanders or AOC. Like them, he's a socialist, right. But he's more left-wing than them. What vote did he get? Remember now, Marine Le Pen got 23.1%. Jean-Luc Mélenchon got 22%.
I heard, yeah.
In other words, the very least you ought to know is that the socialist left is virtually in a dead heat with that far right. But I'm not done. One of the political parties running for president was the French Communist Party. Okay, how much did they get? 2.5%. Had the Communist Party unified with Mr. Mélenchon, and those two parties could discuss doing things like this together, and they've done that in the past. Had they gotten together, the combined vote would have been 22 for Mr. Mélenchon, 2.5 for the communists. Together, that would have given them 24.5, and Le Pen would be out of the run. I mean,
right.
What? And America have no idea. Last point. In the run-up to the election, here's an issue that was not a major concern. Ukraine. The big issues were inflation. The big issues were the gap between rich and poor. The big issue was the failure of the president of France to get his program done. Another big issue that he wants to raise the retirement age. In other words, not to let people retire until they're older than the age
and ready
they
to
are
die.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And not only the left wing, but the right wing in France went after him. And the overwhelming majority of French people agree, not with the president, but with the right and left. You could have had an interesting conversation. France is a couple of hours by train from Ukraine. They have every reason to be interested. They aren't. Why might that be? Why are you could have had interesting debates and discussions. Instead, the Americans are left with a completely caca. I mean, I don't know how to say this politely. Nonsense idea, and this isn't unique to France. It's true from all, the German story. The German story is, here's how it's understood in Europe. When the war in Ukraine breaks out, the Germans, who want to keep a good relationship with Russia because they depend on Russian gas and oil, particularly gas. So they're not going along. Biden sends Blinken over there, and they say, we need you to get on board. The Germans say, what's it worth to you? Answer. We're going to let you rearm. We're going to approve the rearmament of Germany. Let's remember, Germany was World War II. Yeah. Right. Germany was denied an armory after World War I, for which they were blamed, and World War II, for which they were blamed. The United States said, we will support, get ready now, a tripling of your defense budget to give you the biggest army in Europe. Everybody else in Europe is now aware, not that they have a problem with Russia, they knew they had a risk there. They now understand they have a problem much closer, Germany, which is already an economic powerhouse inside of Europe and will now be a dominant military force, which it wasn't before.
Right.
Okay. Here's the irony of ironies for Americans. Why would Germany want that? They're not going to have a war with Russia. They'd probably lose that. They've lost twice trying to take over Russia. I don't think they're going to do it. You know who they're worried about? The United States.
Right.
They want to be freer to figure out which way the wind is blowing, and having an army that the United States has to worry about gives them a bit more wiggle. The ironies here that we will look back on, they should stop everyone dead in their tracks to begin to rethink. Otherwise, if you follow the mainstream media, it's like trying to understand Shakespeare by reading a classic comic book.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. That's why we do what we do, Professor. Now, let me ask you something. Now, let's get a little bit localized to America here, because there's while what we're talking about has a lot to do with what is ultimately going to occur with the birth the living and the death of these economic systems. But in the short term, I've got into several discussions with some people who have a tendency to believe that inflation is divine. And what I've been trying to point out to many is that how can inflation be divine? How can we have a gasoline shortage when Venezuela is sitting on a pool of oil? And because they don't want the oil to, first of all, let me put it this way. I want to know if you agree with this. My contention is we're not exploiting Venezuelan oil because the corporations under the current Venezuelan government cannot control it. In other words, the basic tenet behind Venezuela is that the oil resources belong to the people. And I know there's corruption, et cetera, but that was Chavez's main tenet.
Right. Yeah, no, I could not agree more. And I think, I don't mean to be impolite, but the economic literacy in the United States has not been developed. That's as polite as I know how to be. But let me explain. An inflation is a word that simply describes a general rise in the price of pretty much everything. Not everything the same amount.
Right.
Food goes up this amount and fuel goes up that amount and rent goes up. But in general, prices are rising. Okay, let's begin the basic economics. Who determines a price? In other words, who raises it if it's
those
going
with
up?
Price and power.
Right. And that's called the employer class.
Right.
Roughly in the United States, 1% of our people are employers. The other 99% aren't. The other 99%, we're the ones who pay the prices, but we don't set them. Even anyone who's listening who ever had a job knows that if you're not the employer or you're not on the board of directors of the corporation, no one ever asks your opinion about setting the prices of what's produced in the company where you work. A tiny number of people. So if you're not happy with prices going up, the anger or the upset or the question should be directed at the 1% of our people who are in the position to do it. Moreover, we live in a capitalist system which allows them, because they are quote unquote free enterprises, to jack up the price whenever the hell they wish to. All right, second point, and I'm just being an economics teacher here. Why do employers make the decisions they do, including the raising of a price? The answer is that the employer's every action is dictated by what they themselves tell us dictates it, namely to make money. They're in business to profit is their bottom line, they tell us. They are taught in business school, and I've taught in business schools. They are taught every decision you make should be geared towards, will it improve your profitability or will it not? If you raise your profits, your career goes up. If you don't, your career goes into the toilet. Okay, so the honest answer to why employers raise prices is the same answer every kid in business school writes on his or her exam. It's because it's profitable. If you think you can get away by charging more, that's your job to do it. I'll remind you of a famous saying that describes capitalism. The seller always sells at the best price the market will bear. You know what that means? You jack up the price if you can get away with it. So we have an inflation because businesses think they're in a situation where they can get away with raising the price. And in many cases, they're right. But that's why we have it. It's not from God. It's not divine. It's not like a rainfall coming out of nature. And by the way, let me end this by reminding folks of a Republican conservative president named Richard Nixon. On August 15th, 1971, he went on radio and television. He was the president at the time. And he said, we've got a terrible inflation. And here's what I'm going to do. And he declared what came to be known as a wage price freeze.
Control. Yeah.
Okay. And here's what he said. As of tomorrow, we gave the talk in the late afternoon or evening. As of tomorrow morning, if you're a business and if you raise your price, we're going to arrest you and throw you into jail. Because guess what? The inflation stopped on a dime. There is no issue here. There's no big fat complexity. If you were an honest society, you would be debating right now the pros and cons of what they're doing now, which is not stopping the inflation, currently running 8.5%, according to the government release yesterday. Everything you do now, including doing nothing, has all kinds of consequences. But we don't even have a discussion. We don't even have a debate. When I explain to people the history of Mr. Nixon, most of my audience never heard about it. This is new news for them that we've solved the problem. So again, it is this sad bubble of self-imposed ignorance that people like you open up by your work, by your exposing these kinds of things. But it's really tragic for a country with the mounting problems we have to be as childishly narrow in what it thinks about, let alone discusses.
That is why I love to have you, because you really, I think, first of all, given what you do, it ensures that people get exactly what we're talking about here, educated. Now, Professor, we have one last question here, and that is, where do we go from here? I mean, we understand we're in a down spiral, but for those of us who still have to exist as we go down, where do we go from here?
Well, I think we have, at the highest level, we have to come to terms with a basic choice. And I can't tell you whether the Republicans or the Democrats are the better bet to figure this out, to face it, and to deal with it. I don't have much confidence in either of them. So I'm appealing to the average American citizen. I have more confidence in him or her. So here's the question. After the American Revolution in 1776, the British said, let's give it one more trial. And in 1812, we had another war between Britain and the United States. And the British were defeated again. They still didn't accept it because in the Civil War, the British seriously considered siding with the slave South against the North. They didn't do it in the end, but they certainly considered it. Okay, we can have with China war. I mean, I can't imagine it. The risk to the entire population, literally every person alive, is catastrophic. So I'm terrified that they will bumble and fumble their way into a military conflict. And looking at Ukraine, wow, there we have a kind of early installment. Yeah, it's terrible. So the alternative is compromise. Sit down. You're still important here in the United States. You're still a rich country. You're the richest single country in the world. You still have a lot of chips on your side of the table. Sit down, work out a compromise that allows the Chinese to grow and gather into their hands what they have proven they're capable of doing, but that safeguards the world and that gets the world in. Look, those were the ideas behind the League of Nations. That was the idea behind the United Nations. We were supposed to create institutions that would never again risk the kind of horrible wars that made the 20th century so tragic. We either learn to do that, we either get politicians that are prepared to do that, or we are taking a risk that will make you and me and everybody alive today face an indefinite future of well-deserved anxiety.
Dr. Richard Wolff, Professor of Economics Emeritus, University of Massachusetts, Amherst, thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right. And folks, don't forget to get The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. Thank you so kindly, Professor, for having been on Politics Done Right.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for producing these programs on an ongoing basis. It's one of the most important public services anyone could do.
Thank you. You can listen and or watch Politics Done Right Mondays through Fridays on Facebook Live at facebook.com/politicsdoneright or on YouTube Live at politicsdoneright.com/YouTube. Please do not forget to follow me on Twitter for updates. My Twitter handle is @Egberto Willies, @EGBERTOWILLIES. But don't you forget, listen to us live on air at KPFT 90.1 FM on Thursdays at noon and at Fridays at 11 a.m. all Central Time. Please get one of my several books out there. As I see it, Class Warfare, the only resort to right-wing doom, for a contribution of $120. It's worth it. How to talk to your right-wing relatives, friends, and neighbors for a contribution of $120. How to make America utopia, take away the economy from those who rigged it, for a pledge of $120. Get any two of those books for $200, any three of those books for $250. The contributions for my books go directly to support our station, KPFT 90.1 FM. Alternatively, folks, please get your basic KPFT only membership for $40, a Pacifica only membership for $25, or choose from one of our many other gifts for your contribution. Just go to kpft.org, choose Politics Done Right for the program, and select an option either for our books or something else to support the station. It is definitely worth it. Please remember to keep your community radio station in your minds. Keep KPFT on your mind. Talk about it. Tell your friends about it. Tell them you know about this station in town, 90.1 FM Houston, that needs your support. That is there to provide that nourishment that we need. KPFT 90.1 FM Houston. Well, folks, that's it for today. You know how I'm going to end this baby. My name is Egberto Willies. This is Politics Done Right. And you know how I end this baby. I am what? Out.
Welcome to Politics Done Right. I am your host, Egberto Willies. This is a progressive program that will take the mystery out of politics. This is the program that will encourage you to make sure government becomes we the people. Whether you are liberal, progressive, conservative, or otherwise, you get to air your point of view. We are an independent media outlet that, unlike mainstream media beholden to corporations, we only owe allegiance to you. Remember, you can also send me a tweet at EGBERTOWILLIES. That is at Egberto Willies. Let us engage. It is Politics Done Right.